328, the BB160 locomotive, diesel electric locomotive, reverser, the removal, disassembly, cleaning, inspection, repair, and assembly, installation, and test. Toolkit SC494-97-CL-E12, testing equipment of variable DC voltage supply and materials and parts, dry cleaning solvent. Removal. High voltage is used in operation of equipment. Do not be misled by the term low voltage. Potentially as low as 50 volts may cause death. Remove rings, bracelets, wristwatches, neck chains before working around a locomotive. Truly can catch on the equipment and cause injury to may short across an electrical circuit, causing severe burns or electrical shock. Open the electrical equipment cabinet door, set the battery switch to open, make sure the electrical wires are labeled and the wires numbers are polarity signs. Disconnect the wire for the reverser. Disconnect the airline fittings, remove the four nuts, lock washers, flat washers, cap screws, and flat washers, and the reverser. Number 7. Okay? The reverser continued. All bus bars, cables, and contact mounting rods must be marked with the proper installation before removal of the reverser to prevent misapplication. Subsequent electric damage and care must be exercised in handling and storing the bus bars to prevent bending of the copper. Remove the hose, elbow, pipe plug, nipple, and less tees and nipples, and the 15 and the adapter. Remove the two bolts, lock washers, magnet valve assembly gasket. Refer to step 26 for disassembly of the magnet valve assembly. Remove the two bolts, lock washers, magnet valve assembly, and gasket. Refer to step 26 for the disassembly of the magnet valve assembly. Remove the 3 screws, lock washers, 2 nuts, lock washers, cap screws, and interlock. Remove the tension springs, cotter pins. Remove the nut, lock washer, bolt, and pawl assembly. Loosen the lock nut. Remove the set screws with the lock nut and lock washer. Remove the operating lever assembly and the wood rough key. Disassembly continued. Disassembly. Remove the 4 nuts 42, lock washer 43, flat washers 44. Disconnect the 4 fingers. Remove the 4 carriage bolts, flat washers, and spacers. 12. Remove the 2 bolts, lock washers, rods, and remove the 5 sleeves, 4 supports. Remove the 4 nuts, lock washer, flat washers. Disconnect the 4 rings, 4 fingers. To disconnect the 4 carriage bolts, flat washer, and spacers. 14. Remove the 2 bolts, lock washers. Remove the 5 sleeves and the 4 supports. Disassembly continued. Remove the 4 nuts, lock washer, flat washer. Remove the 4 carriage bolts, flat washer, spacers. One end of the 4 bus bars are disconnected at a time. Remove the 2 bolts, lock washer, bus bar, and rods. Remove the 5 sleeves and supports. Remove the 4 nuts, lock washer, flat washer. Remove the carriage bolts, flat washer, bus bars, and remove the 2 bolt lock washer rod for the 5 sleeves and 4 supports. Reverser disassembly continued. Remove the 4 nut, lock washer, flat washer bolts and spacers. Remove the 2 bolts, lock washers, and 5 sleeve 4 supports. Remove the 16 screw lock washers, 8 support springs, seats, and fingers, support barriers. Remove the top end frame, bottom end frame, and from the shaft. Remove the thrust bearing sleeve and the 4 support barriers, 3 insulator spacers, sleeves from the shaft. Disassembly continued. Turn the guide lock 90 degrees. Remove the top end of the frame. Remove the 8 bolt lock washer cylinder head and gasket. Remove the piston assembly. Remove the 2 self-lock lock nut followers and packaging from packings and from the piston. Disassembly. Continued. Disassemble the magnet valve assembly 19 and 23 by the following. Remove the cap plug, gasket, and spring inlet valve. Remove the 2 cap screws, lock washers, armature guide, and armature 131 and 132. Remove the retaining ring coil and rubber washer valve stem 138, and remove the 2 cap screws, magnet frame from the valve stem 138 and the valve body 139. Cleaning and inspection. Dry cleaning solvent PD 680 is toxic and flammable. Wear protective gloves and goggles. Use only well ventilated areas. Avoid contact with skin, eyes, and clothes, and don't breathe vapors or do not use near flame or excessive heat. The flash point between 100 and 138 degrees Fahrenheit. If becomes dizzy, get fresh air, medical aid immediately. If contact with eyes made with the wash, your eyes get medical aid immediately. Compressed air used in cleaning purposes will not exceed 30 psi. Do not direct compressed air against the skin. Use goggles with full face shield. Use dry cleaning solvent to clean metal materials. Dry the compressed air. Inspect mold parts for warpage breaks and molded parts for warpage breaks and cracks. Inspect the fingers and 45 and 57 alloy them. If the alloy material is worn through the base of the metal, replace the fingers. Inspect the seat valve, and if the valve stem does not meet the seat properly, lap the valve stem in the graphite oil, and after the valve stem has been properly seated, clean ports to remove the compound. If the valve seats are excessively scored or worn, replace the seats. Inspect the coil for damaged insulation. Use multimeter measure resistance of the coil. Resistance is between 72.5 to 93.3 ohms. Replace the coil if it is not between that. Repair consisting replace defective parts. Assembly. Assemble the magnet valve assembly 19 and 23 by the following. Magnet valve assemblies are identical and are assembled in the same way. Install the valve stem into the valve body. Make the magnet frame on the valve body. Install the two screws. Position the rubber washer on the coil on the valve stem. Install the retaining ring 133. Position piston armature. The armature guide on the valve stem. Install the two lock washers and screws. Install the inlet valve spring of the gasket and the cap plug. Position the packaging followers and pistons in the two stall and two self-locking nuts. Installing position assembly into the two end frame. Install gasket cylinder head, 8 lock washer bolt, and install the guide block and rotate 90 degrees. Position the shaft, install the sleeve spacer, 3 insulators from the support barrier sleeve, thrust bearing, install the bottom of the end of the frame, top end of the frame on the shaft, position the 8-finger seats and spring support on the support barrier, install 16 lock washers and screws, position the 4 support 5 sleeve rod and rods. Install the 2 lock washers. Install 4 spacers, bolts, flat washers, lock washers, and nuts. Position the 4 supports and 5 sleeves. Install the rod, 2 lock washers, and bolts. Position the 4 spacers, bus bar. Install the 4 flat washers, carriages, bolts, and flat washers, lock washers, and nuts. Position the 4 supports and 5 sleeves. Install the rod and 2 lock washers and bolts. The assembly. Continued. Install 4 spacers, flat washers, carriage or bolts. Install the 4 flat washers, lock washers, 67 and nuts, 66. Position the 4 support, 65, 5 sleeves, 64. Install the rod, 63, 2 lock washers and bolts. Install the 4 spacers, flat washers, carriage or bolts. Connect the 4 fingers. Install the 4 flat washers, block washers and nuts. Position the 4 supports on the 5 sleeve. Position the rod. Install the 2 lock washers and bolts. Position the 4 spacers. Install the 4 flat washers, carriage, bolts. Continue connection over the fingers. Install the 4 flat washers, lock washers, and nuts. Install the wood roof key and operating lever valve assembly. Install the set crew and lock nut and the lock washer. Install the pawl assembly and the bolt lock washer nut and the cotter pin 10-inch spring. Position the interlocking. Install the 2 cap screws, lock washers, nuts, and 3 washers and screws. Position the gasket magnet valve assembly. Install the 2 lock washers and bolts. Position the gasket magnet valve assembly. Install the 2 lock washers and bolts. Install the adapter, nipples, tees, adapters, pipe plugs, and pipe plug elbow and the hose. Installation. Position the reverser. Install the 4 flat washers, cap screws, flat washers, lock washers, and nuts connecting the airline fittings. Install electrical wires in accordance with the wire diagram. Test. Manually operate interlocking contacts with a multimeter. Check resistance for the fingers infinitely while open and continually while closed. Set the barrier switch to close. Close the cabinet doors. Start the locomotive. Build up the air pressure. Set the reverser to forward and reverse while checking the reverser for the proper operation.